welcome to Live at Epiphan. It is Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, and so glad you're all here to join us today. We have an incredible guest panel today with some of the top experts in all things audio-visual, live streaming, cameras, and audio. And why don't we just get right to it and introduce them? So starting first off, we have a great friend of Epiphan here today, Photo Joseph. Photo Joseph, why don't you introduce yourself?
For bringing me onto the show. So I'm Photo Joseph. I'm a content creator, photographer, filmmaker, live streamer, all those good things. And you can find me everywhere on the YouTubes and on the socials at Photo Joseph.
Awesome. And we also have joining us today, Aaron Parecki. Aaron, welcome, and I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks. So happy to be here with you all today. I'm Aaron Parecki. I'm also, I guess, a YouTuber content creator. I focus on live streaming and live video technology stuff. Do a lot of stuff here on YouTube around the A10 Mini or other tools for live streaming. So yeah, very nice to be here.
And of course, another friend of the channel, Curtis Judd, joining us again. Curtis, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, it's good to be here. I'm Curtis Judd. I have a YouTube channel where we talk about mostly how to improve your lighting and sound for video. So really delighted to be here as well.
So we've got all of our bases covered. We have live streaming, cameras, audio, a bunch of expertise. But I wanted to sort of start by prefacing this. Joseph, Aaron, Judd, you guys have done some pretty cool collaborations recently. I know you've been doing some SRT streaming and aggregating some streams and creating some collaborative content. And one of the sort of recurring content formats that you have is the 4 Friends stream. And we don't have John with us today, but I thought that's been pretty cool of how you've been able to merge your channels and your audience and create some really cool, cross content with one another's channel. Joseph, why don't you tell me a little bit about how that came about and how you've been making that happen?
Yeah, sure. So the whole idea was that, all of us, all the channels you mentioned, we all are constantly experimenting with new streaming tech, switching tech, cameras, obviously, mic, sound, lighting, everything else. And it became a way to come together and try things out in a kind of, let's call it a safe space, but it's still a public show where we're all on together trying out some new thing. And we've only done a couple shows so far, but we're playing with, of course, some of your hardware, playing with some Blackmagic hardware, and just trying out different things and seeing how it works on a collaborative sense. Because that's one of the bigger challenges, of course, in doing live streaming. It's easy enough to do it just from you, but as soon as you want to get other people involved, it's a whole other level of complexity. And so this gives us a chance to all try what we're actually talking about in a real world, real life situation. And it's been a blast to do.
And Aaron, I know you're always advising on some pretty unique workflows and solutions when it comes to creating sort of aggregated guest contribution content. What is your take on the 4 Friends stream, and how have you been able to sort of work the magic to bring that together?
Yeah, I think Joseph said it really well. It's a good chance to be able to try out these new things and try out some of the new hardware it's a production environment, but it's also like okay if I make a mistake because we learn together. And I've definitely made mistakes on my channel live, and then the question is, how do you recover from it? And then I can talk about that, and it's a lot of fun to be able to do that.
We so just to sort of I think I actually forgot to introduce also, we do have another guest on the show who many of you are already familiar with. So why don't we introduce him now? We've got George Herbert here.
Thanks,
George,
Dan.
Welcome to your own show.
Yeah.
I'm sort of playing host today, but you're the regular here. So, tell us about what's happening with you. What's going on?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's another Thursday. It's another live show, which is great. But I'm actually just really excited to actually kind of be here in more of a guest panelist role today with these other guys who have extensive knowledge in all of these different things, as you've been hearing about. I love technology. I love streaming stuff, but also in the context of what I do day to day with Epiphan, my scope is a little more narrow sometimes. So I love watching the content that all of these guys put out because I get to learn something from them. And that's always a fantastic piece. So I'm just kind of here to fill in the gaps a little bit today, which is kind of nice.
So, speaking of, bringing together, a bunch of channels, the application of, guest contribution, it's something we're seeing obviously a lot more of, but it's going to continue to be, we're expecting a trend that will continue. So I'm curious, what kind of methods have you all tried to merge guests? And I don't know, maybe we start with Joseph, because I know, Joseph, you've played around with things like Blackmagic Bridge and vMix Call and a lot of different solutions to sort of bringing together a bunch of different sources from different regions. So what has been your experience in this over the last year or so?
Sure. So, well, I mean, it goes back more than a year for sure of trying to bring people in. Probably 5-6 years ago or so, I started it wasn't a live podcast. We weren't doing it live, but it was no, I take that back. We were doing it live. It was kind of a video podcast format where I'd bring in a guest from some software company and interview them and talk to them about their product. And it's funny because I remember going back to setting that up. I really wanted to do a picture-in-picture type of thing, or a split screen rather, side-by-side type of thing, and not just a picture-in-picture. And I couldn't do that with any basic level Blackmagic ATEM hardware. And I remember I bought the Blackmagic Television Studio, I think was the first one. It's like $1,000 product. And that was, forget about it, didn't do anything. Traded that in for the next level up, a $2,000 product. And that gave me picture-in-picture, but no split screen. And I finally had to go to the big ATEM 2ME, which I'm still using today for most of my my switching, to get something called SuperSource. And this was also that I could bring in another guest. And at the time, I was simply doing it by screen scraping a Skype call. So bringing in a Skype caller to another computer that was piping in, and then that gave me the ability to do a side-by-side layout. So it was a massive amount of money for this ridiculously, what should have been a simple setup, and today is done much more easily. But that's how I started doing other calls, bringing them in by screen scraping a Skype call, because that gave us the best quality at the time, and doing a picture-in-picture layout or a side-by-side layout using the ATEM hardware. That's where it kind of started for me.
Screen scraping. So, that is maybe a little less common now, but still I've seen a lot of setups recently with like 12 laptops and each one has a pinned Zoom caller. How practical is that? I don't know. Curtis, you've been joining a lot of streams lately, maybe not hosting as many yourself, but when people ask you to join their productions, what are some of the common asks from the guest standpoint, and what is that experience like as a guest joining streams?
Yeah, it depends. I mean, there are software encoders that attempt to do this. There are cloud-based services as well. So, things like StreamYard, Restream.io has a similar type thing. There are apps like Ecamm Live, which allow you to bring remote guests in. And I think they each have their own kind of costs and benefits. But the thing that I found kind of the most interesting is that what I've done mostly with you guys and what we did on the Four Friends in a Pearl a couple of weeks ago was using SRT, because it's an open source protocol that allows you to send a stream, and it's very high quality, low latency, and it solves a lot of problems that I experienced with some of the others as well. Now, it's not to say that there isn't a place for some of these other, like StreamYard is very simple. It's quality-wise is okay. There's a price to entry if you want to go up to a higher resolution than 720p, I think it is. So there, some costs and benefits there, but the SRT stream, what we've seen so far, certainly what I've seen and what I've experienced with Joseph and Aaron as well, and with George on the piece that we did, really solid, really, really impressive what you can accomplish with an SRT stream.
Yeah, it's kind of funny you mentioned that, Curtis, because obviously, here at Epiphan, we have a slightly biased opinion, being a hardware manufacturer. That SRT streaming being part of our hardware is of a particular interest to us. So we kind of talk about it a lot, but we're also users of it, right? Like we're producing this show right now that way, and you guys have hardware to do that, but we've had a lot of our guests join us using software solutions, but still using SRT, and it can make a big difference. But to kind of follow up on Dan's question, I'm kind of curious, because I read a lot of things on video engineering subreddits and stuff like that, where people have said that Solutions like vMix Call either have bad latency, which is kind of hard to believe. I would think it should be no different than video conferencing, or bad quality in some cases. I think everyone's pretty aware of, video conferencing sometimes overcompresses or scales too much or whatever it is. For myself as a guest, I'm usually asked to join other people's webinars and content like that through Zoom or Teams or something like that. And it's not my favorite, but yeah, it's kind of an interesting part to try and overcome. And I think that's what I found interesting about what you guys did with kind of the 4Pearl setup.
We do have some questions coming in regarding SRT. I see that Bernard is asking about using SRT to a CDN, which is that possible? I mean,
Yes.
We're using SRT to sort of aggregate our guest sources right now and then do some producing and mixing, and then we're sending this to YouTube via RTMP. But is anyone familiar with CDNs starting to adopt SRD as a technology?
Still very limited list of companies that are doing that. Really one of the few that is doing it and doing it well and really talks about it is one of the founders of the SRT Alliance, and that's Wowza. Not too many other CDNs are doing it. You'll have to forgive me. I don't even know what day it is half the time anymore, but quite a while back, we had Tim from Wowza join us for a webinar and on our live show, and he talked a fair bit about that. And again, we were using an SRT based connection and aggregating those things together, but in that instance, he was actually using the Wowza Clearedcaster encoding hardware to send it to our Pearl, where we were aggregating it and sending it back out. And so, yeah, they exist, and but I think it's picking up steam. I think we'll start seeing it more and more. YouTube recently added HLS to their options of ingestion, and I think we'll start to see more CDNs add more pieces like that.
Why don't we talk about the way that this show is being run? Because this has a somewhat unique setup and how this is actually happening.
Yeah.
George, you're probably best to describe that.
Sure. Well, to be honest, we're doing basically the same thing that you guys did for your four friends in a Pearl stream, which is, we have kind of, in this case, we're doing 5, but we have, sort of 5 contributors and feeding those all into a Pearl, and Cameron, hiding in the background, is kind of mixing and switching all of us together from these various SRT inputs and then sending it back out to RTMP. We also are sending it back out to RTMP not only to the Epiphan channel, but to all of your channels as well. So we're multi-streaming back out as well as bringing in 5 different SRT streams. But SRT, as great as it is, always still does have a little bit of latency, and we've adjusted this for the 5 of us to be in line with each other. It's about 200 milliseconds.
Is Cameron showing the setup here behind the scenes?
Yeah, Cameron's showing the behind-the-scenes stuff. But 200 milliseconds is enough to really kind of ruin a real-time conversation. And look, it doesn't sound like a lot, but in terms of people having a conversation, it's too much. So we have a back channel, and you guys did the same thing, I think, on yours, where you run a back channel of maybe even just audio in some other system, right? It could be a phone call, in our case, we're using a Zoom call, but it really could be almost anything that just makes sure that as we're talking, it's in real time of what we hear in our monitors. But then what goes out to the production feed is all over SRT.
I've
got someone in my chat watching saying this is one of the clearest, sharpest streams that they've seen. So what is the delivery method that you're doing to send to our channels right now?
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, it starts from the beginning, right? Where you guys are all contributing through SRT streams. The 3 of you guys are professionals in this space, so you have great audio setups, you have great camera setups, and you have good gear, right? So getting SRT, and I think all of 3 of you are using the Pearl Nanos you used before today. So that's really the magic. We're starting from a ground level of using obviously high quality cameras and high quality audio, putting that into a hardware encoder that's sending SRT into our production workflow. But that means that we have direct control over the high quality nature of that video and audio, right? We can set the bit rates we want. And some of us, like Aaron, has huge amounts of bandwidth to just, he could probably send, 4K at super high bit rate if he wanted to over his connection. that's an advantage of using even not necessarily a hardware encoder, but even a software encoder where you have manual control, which is something that a lot of the video conferencing solutions can never give you, means that you're starting at a very high level of quality and just kind of carrying that forward.
I do see a few questions coming in on chat of people asking if we have a diagram, and actually I do have a bit of a diagram that demonstrates what we're doing here. So Cameron, if you just switch to my single, I'll switch my layout over to this diagram, if you will.
We didn't practice this. Let's do it on the fly, guys.
No, but it's a lot easier when people see it, kind of the topology of it. So I'll switch here, and you can get a sense. So we've got, let me see here. Just bear with. There we go. There we go. Yeah, so this is basically what we're doing, and I can try to zoom this a little bit and make it easier to see. So Pearl 2 being the base station that sort of aggregates the streams, and that's where Cameron's mixing and switching layouts. And then, each guest has a Pearl Nano. In my case, I have a Pearl Mini, actually.
So do I, but same difference.
SRT into Pearl 2, and then you'll see the VC is our back channel with Zoom. That's how we're communicating with one another in real time. And then, however many streams we want to push out to. In this case, we're streaming to YouTube over our TMP, but it could be any number. The other advantage here is that you do have the capability to record ISOs of each guest on your Pearl 2 or on your central mixing production box. So if you wanted to do some post-production or create some editing, some recordings, possible to do that as well.
Reflected in that diagram, which I think someone was asking about in my chat, is the what's behind our Pearl Nanos in our studios. And I think it's one of the nice things about this workflow is that it doesn't really matter. So like we just bring anything into the Pearl Nano over HDMI or SDI, and then from there that's doing all the encoding and pushing via SRT to the main thing doing the aggregation. So in
That's
our
actually
cases,
a great point.
Yeah. So you could put a DSLR camera directly into the Nano, or in I think all of our cases, we're all using ATEM hardware sort of behind that layer of, running our cameras in our normal studio environments with switchers or whatever it is, however complicated it is. We just need to produce some video feed that gets into that device over HDMI or SDI for it to get pulled into the mix.
Well, to not go too far into the weeds, because I know this comes up in our videos all the time, because, Joseph, the question was, this is super clear. Whenever we do webinars, I get that question every single webinar I do. People go, this is incredible. I can't believe the quality of the visuals in this webinar. How are you doing it? So maybe let's just go around, and I'll start, but let's just go around and give like a super high level overview of what you're using. So for me, I might actually have the most basic setup of everyone here to some degree. I use a Sony A5100, very inexpensive, low level, but also you can get a lot out of it if you want to, mirrorless camera. Canon M200 would be a great equivalent. That I just have HDMI into my Pearl, and then I use a Blue Yeti Nano over USB into my Pearl, and that's it. That's all I'm doing, really. That's all I need to do, and it means that I can just send that SRT stream out at a super high quality. So I don't know who wants to go next to give kind of high level.
Probably Aaron. Aaron's, yeah.
Sure. Why don't we go the other end of the spectrum? Yeah, this is. I'm using my normal streaming setup here. The camera is a Lumix G7. I'm a big fan of it because it's relatively inexpensive. And then I've got my normal studio lighting. It's mainly one panel up there. My audio is the little Movo microphone. It's right up here out of frame, running into the camera. And then I could have plugged that into the Nano, but no, I always make things complicated. So I'm actually sitting in front of my desk here where this is running and my camera's running into my little matrix, and I can send that video back out to the ATEM, a different ATEM, a monitor, whatever I want. It's all routable through this SDI matrix. And then I'm actually feeding the Nano on the other desk via SDI because that's the easiest way for me to get a signal out there. So yeah, it doesn't really matter, what I've got going on here as long as I'm producing a good clean video signal and eventually getting something to the Pearl, it works.
Can I just point out also that kind of the cool thing here is like we're doing some, you just demonstrated it really, Aaron, is like some upstream switching. So,
Right.
you have the ability to, switch your angles. That kind of alleviates our producer, Cameron. He's wearing a lot of different hats today, just switching this show, but with some upstream capabilities. And I think, Photo Joseph, you were demonstrating some of your graphics that you can run. Cameron, why don't we switch to his ISO and, we can maybe demonstrate that a little bit, but
Yeah, sure. So like I don't have a whole lot set up right now, but I could bring up a lower third on my graphic. I have a chat integration, which is actually Aaron's chat integration that I'm using. But this is all coming through a software service called Mimo Live that's running on one of my systems. It's then going out as a video plus alpha over dual SDI over a Blackmagic output box that then gets fed into the big ATEM where it all comes together. And I don't even have the other cameras turned on right now, so I can't switch away from this camera angle. But normally there could be up to, 7 or 8 different cameras activated at any one time that I can switch through.
So in a way, it's like, although we're all guests, we're also kind of producers as well, right? Because
Right.
we're able to, cue and key and all those things. Curtis, I'm curious, you do a lot of online education, a lot of training. In previous times, a lot of that might have been delivered obviously in person or over video conferencing. I'm wondering, in your world, where is the threshold between, choosing a video conferencing solution versus something like this, where, we're actually a little more produced and we're using some higher end gear and streaming protocols and so forth?
Well, I mean, there are a couple things, considerations. I think number one, I think partly is reach. If you're going to use something like Zoom or Teams or something like that, obviously you're kind of making that a closed experience, and that can be, sometimes that's what you want exactly, but other times you want to reach a much larger audience, and that's where, going to other platforms, like in this case, we're going to YouTube and Facebook, and actually I don't even know how many YouTube channels we're going to today. I know we're going to mine, Joseph's, Aaron's, who knows, we're probably going to George and who everyone else is too, but of course the Epiphan channel, but that's one consideration. But another one is, what we've seen with the pandemic, when a lot of this education type material had to move online, some of it was already online, but some of it had to move online, is that we also saw some products become available that kind of make that a little easier. The Pearl Nano, I think, is one example of that. Blackmagic's ATEM, the mini line, is another example of that. But I think that there's so many more options, and just a basic capture card can do a lot of that too if you choose to use a software encoder. So if you're going to use OBS or, any of the others that are available out there, there's a whole slew of them. So you have so many different options now. It's just amazing. I think for education, one of the things I find most helpful is having multiple inputs, and that's where, just having a single capture card isn't necessarily the best solution for that. That's where having maybe a mini switcher is a little bit more useful. So I can, for example, go to an overhead camera and demonstrate the use of a product. I can come back to a main camera. I can go over to I've got an iPad that has an agenda or, pre-submitted questions for my live stream. So it just gives me a lot of flexibility that is really, really nice. And so, it's opened up a kind of a big world as far as my audience is concerned. We can do a lot of things today that we weren't doing before. Before, when I when I first started streaming in 2015, in terms of the platforms that were available, there weren't a ton of options unless you got into the much more expensive productions. But for kind of a small-time educator like myself, there just weren't a lot of options. At that point, it was like Google Hangouts, which streamed to YouTube, and those were some pretty. I think I've hidden most of them now, so hopefully they're not available publicly because they're pretty embarrassing. But there's just so many more options available today. It's really a great time to be doing this.
It's kind of funny that's a great example of how far we've come, right? It's like, you wanted to be live on YouTube, you had to use Hangouts and do Hangouts live and do all these other things, and it was just
yeah,
not exactly the highest of quality. Yeah, it's pretty
But it was
amazing.
easy.
It
Right,
was
easy.
easy.
that's
Yeah.
one of the benefits, and I think that's still a huge benefit for a lot of the systems that are out there, the web-based platforms. It's easy. And I see this all the time with my clients who are trying to increase the quality of their live shows. Maybe they're doing interviews or whatever it is, they have callers coming in, and all the easy solutions, I don't want to say that the easy solutions aren't good quality. They could be good quality. It's just that the people on the other end of them aren't doing what we're doing here. They aren't setting up
Right.
the good camera and the good microphone and the good lighting. And I get this all the time, kind of, well, what platform can I use to make this look better? It's like, well, you got to get them a good mic and a good camera and a good. They're like, yeah, no, they're not technical. They can't set it up, but I still need it to be better. It's like, I can't help you with that. So those older solutions that are still running in their own different formats are awesome, but if you don't put the quality on the other end, then it's never going to get any better coming through.
Well, I recommend StreamYard all the time to people because of how easy it is. Because like it is easy enough that you can give it to somebody who is not familiar with the broadcast world or live switching at all, and they will be able to spin up and run a show themselves and even participate in the show and have guests who also have no experience with this. It is just, it's so easy. But yeah, if you want good picture quality and audio quality, you can't fix that after the image has been created. You have to fix it before the image has been created, and that's a good camera, good lighting, good microphone, all those things. You know, you have to send a good signal into something before you can expect to have a good picture on the other end.
Yeah, and it's I think that's one of the things that the three of you guys do so well is educating people on all those different pieces, whether it's the camera, the audio, the lighting, all those things, and I think it does help people once they've discovered your channels. 2 weeks ago, I guess our guest was a friend of mine, John Hastings, who's a stand-up comedian, and he had to pivot to online, and he's a perfect example of all the things we just talked about. He doesn't have the technical know-how to suddenly pivot to this online workflow of what capture cards are and what a decent camera is, or even a decent computer to do it software-wise. And he currently streams every day on Twitch, and he uses StreamYard to do it because it was easy for him to run with guests and other content. So it's interesting. It's interesting to see how people have tried to overcome some of these barriers. But again, yeah, Aaron, you're absolutely right. It's what I rant about all the time. I think our audience will be used to me ranting about how, to Joseph's point, some of the stuff you see out there, even just interviews on mainstream media, like the visual and audio quality, is so bad sometimes, and it's not hard to fix. It's just someone has to take the initiative to fix it.
Well, I feel like people are almost using it as using the pandemic as an excuse to have bad audio and video, because prior to this, you would very rarely see on any kind of mainstream media a low quality Skype or Zoom call being broadcast. They would have sent out a crew. They would have done something to make it look good. But then when that capability went away and everybody's just required to do it on their own, suddenly it became okay for the quality to be bad. Because, I mean, look at some of the nightly talk shows that started off as a really bad, basically Zoom call being broadcast live. And you're like, are you kidding me? You guys got millions of dollars. This is the best you can do. And I feel like it's just become almost an excuse now. People go, well, hey, it's the pandemic. We have to, this best we can do is a Zoom call. No, it's not the case.
No.
They could have just hired Joseph and Aaron, and I mean, it's not that complicated.
Still would have cost less than a satellite truck.
Yeah, exactly.
Actually, Aaron, it's interesting you mentioned that, because I was checking out one of your videos recently, and you were helping a friend to set up a charity poker stream, which introduced all kinds of interesting considerations about like stream delay and the show cards. And I think you had it set up where you could see the cards of each player. Maybe you could tell us a bit about how you consulted someone in this case to create that kind of a setup.
Yeah, that was a blast. So that one was actually I was doing the behind the scenes tech for it, but I was not on the stream at all, and I wasn't the host of the event. And that was I think that was actually just last week. I did a live stream about like the super in depth. So definitely take a look at that video if you want like the step by step of the entire workflow. But it was we used StreamYard for the hosts because they were able to then just talk to each other, join from a browser, super easy, and then screen shared the gameplay into it basically. Although that's sort of where things got really complicated, because if you imagine you're playing a live poker game and the audience can see everybody's cards, you don't want a player to be able to pull up the live stream to see what other players have. So we had to delay the entire stream that's showing the poker or the hands by 15 minutes to avoid the problem of players being able to cheat.
That's
so
a huge delay.
it's a huge delay, and the real challenge was that it's too long to just use like the sort of natural delay that occurs in these kinds of systems. Like, we can tweak the delay of this. I don't know how high, but we're at 250 milliseconds right now. We could probably go a second or two, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
But beyond that, it's like you can't really do that in just these built-in tools. And at the same time, the other way that you can typically delay stuff is full on start and stop recording and then play back the recording. And I've done that too, where it's like, we want to delay a broadcast by 5 hours. And that's very easy because you can put a recording on an SD card, pop it in a player, and roll it later. But this was a 3-hour event that had to be delayed 15 minutes, so you needed to be just slightly shifted back continuously. And that's where the real challenge sort of came up, which was, it was fun. It was fun to be able to do all that in a relatively short amount of time, and also we had to change up some of our workflow at the last second. So yeah, if you want the details on that, go check out my live stream where I really dove into the technical bits.
And you were still able to make use of StreamYard, which is kind of interesting because you're using cloud production together with, I'm assuming, some hardware production solution there, which is very interesting. But it brings up a question that maybe I'll just throw this out to the group is, we're seeing a lot more cloud production solutions, whether it's StreamYard or Lightstream even, I think was just acquired by Vitech. ShowFlow is another one that has sort of made its way onto the radar recently. So I'm just curious, like, what are your opinions about cloud production and where it can take us, but like what its limitations might be? And I'll just open that up to whoever has an opinion there.
I have some thoughts. So if you've been following my channel for a while, I'm a big fan of hardware and doing stuff in hardware and off of computers, not on computers. I don't trust computers enough to use them for doing the heavy lifting of shows. So that's why I stay away from things like OBS, even though it is very powerful and you can do a lot more stuff in it. And that's why I've got all this gear on my desk. That's why I've got, hardware switchers, hardware encoders, and things like that. But I have also then been finding a lot of uses for some software-based things as well, although I prefer that software to be then also not on my own computers. Because again, the more stuff I'm running on my own computers, the more it's just very fragile. So I've been really interested in a lot of this cloud production stuff where I don't necessarily want an entirely cloud-based switcher like StreamYard because of the limits of that platform, even though, again, it has a lot of benefits. But I like this sort of hybrid approach of I can run all my cameras locally here, so I can do ridiculous stuff with all these different camera angles and whatever. But then maybe some of the things that I'm already adding in software myself, for example, my chat overlay is a web browser source. My the confetti that pops up in a super chat, that's actually a web page also. And things that aren't necessarily like really hardware driven in the first place. That stuff I don't mind being up in the cloud because that is a good place for it. It is already software driven, and there's a lot of advantages to moving that stuff out in the cloud as well, and you can get more redundancy built in that way too. So I'm starting I'm enjoying exploring that kind of hybrid of still hardware video feeds, but software for the stuff the software is better at of doing that kind of those kinds of overlays and graphics generation.
Mm-hmm.
I think you'll find that's a bias that the three of us have, Aaron and Joseph and I. We all kind of approach it that way. So, typically I'm using a hardware switcher of some sort, and then a hardware encoder to send that off to the platforms where I'm sending it. And then, just like with Aaron, same thing. If I'm going to do some sort of like a chat overlay, I use Aaron's chat overlay as well. That's running on a separate computer. So if that goes down, and that's the delicate part. That's the part that's really fragile. Potentially.
Switch over me real quick.
Not your software.
Sorry.
Got
a super chat.
Got a super chat. So there's the confetti.
Thanks, Petra.
Really
there's
cool.
the confetti.
Yeah. So that's a perfect example of, so if something like that went down, Aaron's whole stream is not messed up. He can still move forward. missing a few features, and that's no big deal. But when you start, especially like if you're doing some educational stuff and you have to share an app on your screen, that gets really complicated if you're running a software encoder there, plus you've got Chrome open with the YouTube stream page, you've got your app, various apps running. It's just a lot. There's just a lot of potential failure points there, and being able to
Windows
move.
update comes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So being able to move a lot of that to hardware is always. I think it results in, at least in my experience, it results in fewer mistakes on the live streams. And we were talking about this before. There are a million potential failure points when you're doing live, and the more of those you can kind of put into a lower risk category, i.e. hardware, the better.
Photo Joseph, what's your opinion on what's coming? I mean, what's the outlook for 2021 and beyond? We're kind of witnessing in real time this shift from, maybe more on-premise to virtual to hybrids of some sort. Where are these trends taking us?
Well, okay, so a couple of different questions. So we want to talk about events or the tech behind the events? Where
I mean, it could be the tech behind the events, but also, how do we support events that maybe are, requiring an on-premise component together with remote guests? How will the hardware support the content in the coming year?
Well, I think because the hardware is getting cheaper and cheaper, and we can very much thank Blackmagic for doing this with the ATEM lineup and launching the ATEM Mini, which was, their timing of that could not have been better, right? It was late 2019, late 2019, just before the pandemic hit, that their cheap lineup of switchers was launched, and then they just kept introducing new, bigger, and better ones that are incredibly affordable and which do allow anybody who's got even just a little bit of a budget and a DSLR, DSLM camera laying around to be able to have that really high quality contribution capability. So I think part of it is the demand of people to say, no, just a webcam is not good enough. Spend a little bit of money, and it's not a lot, spend a little bit of money. And if you want to be a part of this event, that's a hybrid event, like you're saying, something where people are calling in, you've got to look good. It has to look good and sound good. So here's the barrier for entry, and it's pretty low bar. So just get it done. And because this is now so affordable, it really does make it easy for people to do. And it doesn't take that much technical knowledge to set it up and, watch a couple of YouTube videos. I'm sure there's one or two out there, and you can figure that out and get up and running. So it does open up the option, I think, for the future events to have more people calling in and being remote, which, pre-pandemic, if you wanted to speak on an NAB panel, the only way was for you to go to NAB, go to Las Vegas and do it. I don't know that there was any panel where they brought somebody in virtually, unless there was some super famous individual director or producer or whatever that they could only get in that way because of their time. And so that's, all right, we'll make an exception. But, normal people like us, there's no way we'd be able to speak that way. We have to be there. But I think
and even
now
then,
it's like,
it was usually the Skype call with the webcam up the nose.
Right, exactly. Even then it was. Exactly, that's what it was. But I think now, I can imagine the next NAB that is in person, that they'll be opening up to say, look, if you want to attend virtually as a speaker, but you're going to be on a projector to a room full of people who do want to attend in person, that'll be an option as well. And it should be an option. Let's make this as hybrid as we can. But I sure as heck can't wait to get back into actual physical events like that. I mean, I miss the interaction with people. I miss the discoverability that you have in walking a trade show floor that no virtual event can replicate. Unless you're talking about putting on a full 3D immersive virtual reality environment where I can walk around. It's like it's not going to happen, right? I need to go stumble down the aisle and go, what is that thing over there? I've never seen that before. How do you find something if you don't know what you're looking for? And that's how. So I really look forward to those again. But the virtual aspect is fantastic, and it does open it up, and we can do so much more with it if we start bringing them together more.
And I got a lot of opinions about all of that too, because I just love to rant about things. But you're exactly right. I mean, we were talking while we were prepping for the show. The pandemic sort of accelerated a lot of this technology, maybe in the span of 5 months that might have been 5 years otherwise, right? But VR wasn't really one of them, so we're not there into the VR trade show world yet. Maybe that's still another 5 years out as those costs come down too. But at the same time, I agree. I miss going and doing the discoverability and just stumbling around. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of show promoters of any kind, whether it's concerts or trade shows or whatever it is. So it doesn't really matter. Or even churches for that matter, right? Anybody who's doing an in-person event of some kind, schools would count too. A lot of them, I think, at the beginning saw hybrid or virtualizing as the enemy because they wanted to have butts in seats, right? And that's great. But I think some people are starting to finally learn and discover that it actually doesn't mean losing out to online. It's actually an expansion of your audience because the people who want to go in person, they're still going to go. Like they want to go back, right? I think it was Infocom a few months ago did a poll about, let's just say everything was back to normal tomorrow. How many people would go? It's like 95%, right? Like people want to go. But there are some people who never went because the travel, the costs, all those things just wasn't practical. But if they can buy a lower cost ticket and attend a lot of this stuff, keynotes and whatever, the education elements of it online virtually, they will absolutely do it. And it's going to be a fraction of a plane ticket and hotel and food for a week, right? So it's only going to grow the audiences, I think, once people figure out how to do it well. But like we've been saying, nobody's going to attend or pay attention to it if the video and the audio is bad because they'll check out. They're just not interested in the low quality delivery of it.
I've attended or spoken at quite a few virtual conferences over the last year, probably more virtual ones in the last year than I had real ones in the years prior. So there's certainly a market for it. And, this is my setup that you're seeing at right now that I would use for any of these speaking engagements, unless it's something that I move out into the main studio for, but mostly it's going to be here. And it's a good bar, right? This is a good quality setup here. Obviously it can be more, it can be bigger. But I think if you're going to try and draw in the audience that, should I go in person or should I go virtually? And they're only going to go virtually. Then it really needs to go to a next level bar. We really do need to raise that bar even higher and get something that people can sit back at home and watch and go, oh, this is as good as being there, or at least almost as good of an experience as being there. I feel like I'm a part of this. I'm seeing something amazing. I'm getting a ton of information. And the only thing I'm missing is that physical component of bumping into somebody there and everything that goes along with that. But yeah, the possibilities are absolutely there. But it takes time and it takes money. And it does take money to do right. But again, like you're saying, people who would never have gone in the first place can now go buy a cheaper ticket. Well, that's a lot of sales that never would have happened in the first place. Right. And the potential to make a lot more money by the organizers is certainly there.
Yeah, doubling the audience, right?
Yeah, and I think a lot of companies will recognize the value of having this hybrid approach, where it's almost like an upsell channel. When you have you can offer the remote online experience for people who can't afford to go, or we're never sure if they really wanted to go, and they can get the value of those keynotes and things like that, but. If they find enough value there, I think what they'll find is okay, I want to get the next level of value next year and actually go in person. And that's where I can start to meet people and get that additional value that I can't get online. In fact, the funny thing is Joseph and I actually met at NAB in person. That's how we know each other before the pandemic started. And then, and I think there's some value there. And again, the interesting thing is because of the pandemic, I think a lot of companies now have invested in at least some of the technology necessary to do the online streaming. And so now when we kind of go back to something closer to normal and we do start to have the in-person conferences, they've already made a lot of that investment. And so even perhaps some of that, built some of that expertise that goes along with it as well. So it's good times ahead.
I have a question for you, Curtis, because I know you get involved in a lot of sort of corporate and enterprise productions. Now that knowledge base is there and sort of there's been that forced adoption within a lot of the corporate space, how do you see them continuing to leverage these capabilities in as we move forward?
I think we're going to see a lot of, from my perspective, higher quality all hands meetings for distributed organizations. So, for example, the company with which I am employed, we have worldwide, we have 5 different offices across the globe. And so when it's time for an all hands meeting, We now have in place a lot of the things necessary to make them a lot higher quality than they were before. Before, they were basically, we'd have a bunch of people in one room and we'd have a team meetings for everyone else. And you can only imagine how that went. Wasn't the highest quality. We've all been there and done that. So I just think that you're going to see a much higher quality, a better experience overall. And what's interesting too is that I think there's a psychology between the higher quality experience as well, especially when it comes to things like sales and customer meetings and things like that. There's a kind of a natural communication of credibility when you have something that's a little bit nicer looking and nicer sounding versus just a Teams call or a Skype for Business or whatever else people are using today. So there's some value there. It's not just a nicer looking video, which just warms our hearts. It's actually, there's some psychological things there too that kind of increase credibility.
Absolutely. I just anecdotally on that, from speaking from Epiphan as a company standpoint, right? We've been doing that for years when it came to doing customer demos, right? They book a demo with a salesperson. That salesperson typically brings me or someone from my team, from the technical support team, into that call to actually do the product demo, right? And we make sure when we were in the office, we had a dedicated studio space to do just those demos. Now we've been doing that from home, which is a little harder, but still totally possible. And it totally changes the percentage of conversion to sale to do that, right? And it's a huge deal. We've been noticing in the past year doing the webinars that we've been doing on obviously our products, but we would sometimes attend smaller trade shows that it was hard to gauge how much value you were actually getting out of it based on the number of leads you were getting. And we found that some of those webinars we can get twice as many leads from a 1-hour webinar that we were getting from some of those smaller shows in some cases. And part of that is going, back to what we were saying earlier, is that what we're producing from a webinar perspective is visually and audio-wise high quality, so people are more engaged and they stay and they listen as a result. And any company can do that. Any company with any product can do that. It's just a matter of deciding to take that effort and make sure it's as best as it can be.
Well, I think we want to probably start wrapping up. This has been a great discussion. I do want to get to a couple questions that we have coming in, and I'm sure Aaron and Joseph, you might have a couple questions that came in on your channels as well. But I have a question here from Shoji Productions. Question to all. At the end of the day, what's the easiest method to have 1 to 2 guests join a live stream and get a combination of decent quality and ease of setup/use for the guests? Any thoughts? What is the easiest, lowest friction solution
Easiest,
you suggest?
hands down, StreamYard, honestly. It is good enough for most things, especially if your guests have good quality video and audio on their end. It is by far the easiest, if that's your criteria.
Yeah, I think that's probably StreamYard or something like it. There's a bunch of platforms that do kind of the same job. But again, I would just reel it back to saying, starting with, like we've talked about before, using a higher quality camera and higher quality audio, which does not have to be terribly expensive. A mirrorless camera and a decent capture card and a USB mic, and you're set, right? Mm-hmm. Feed that into StreamYard where you can do that ease of production that you can't do in Zoom. That's the big difference, right? You can't clean it up and make it look production-wise good in Zoom and do the confetti and do the other things, right? Where you can in something like StreamYard.
Any other thoughts? Well, if you want to step it up to the next level, where, do we go to SRT? It might make sense. You put a couple Pearl Nanos on a desk.
Obviously, great, right? And we've talked about that. It's awesome, but it's not the cheapest way to go to next level. Well, I guess there is SRT software streaming, isn't there? I haven't played with that. I think, Curtis, you did something with that, didn't you?
Yeah, George and I.
That, yeah.
Yeah, George and I did, and I was impressed with what it. When I went back and watched the show, I was like, wow. And that was with me. In that case, I was using, a camera, microphone. Rivet is the name of the service. So it's all just a software-based SRT encoder, and it was great.
Yeah, the Rivet app is one. I know there's Larix makes like an Android app which you can use to encode SRT and works reasonably well.
So does High Vision. They invented SRT. They also make their own app for phones. But even OBS can output SRT. I mean,
I think it's worth pointing out, though, that any of the SRT solutions, SRT is a one-way protocol. So you then have to deal with how do you talk in a group with them. And that's one of the reasons that StreamYard, whatever, Restream, all those sort of cloud-based ones make it just so much easier because you only need the one environment. So anything else beyond that, you're going to start getting into, now you need to tell the guest to do two things. Send the good quality video and then have some back channel of it could just be audio only, it's fine, but you need something. And then it's more things involved. So it's more steps to explain.
You trade off more complexity for higher quality, basically.
Yeah.
A solution that I've used quite a bit is, I mentioned it earlier, Mimo Live, which I'm using for a lot of my graphics overlays. But it too has a peer-to-peer component where you can have someone call in and you set up a call receiver, if you will, in your system, and they are calling directly into your computer in there. And that works relatively well. I found that it's much better if you're wired. I mean, that goes with any kind of streaming stuff. But when you go wireless with them, if you try to be Wi-Fi, that one falls apart pretty badly. But if you can insist that your callers are all on a wired connection, then that is a pretty good solution, and it gives you a lot of options, a lot of flexibility once you get their feed in, and it's all handled in one place. So you can build a very, very advanced show with that, assuming you can get a good, clean signal coming in.
I would say that one's probably the sort of next step up from doing it all with the online ones, is using what was the one? Mimo, vMix has it also Ecamm. It's all, those are apps run on your own computer locally, but then they have this remote contributor web-based thing where the guest doesn't need any special software. They join through a web browser. So they make it as easy as StreamYard and Restream for the guest, but then a ton more powerful on the host side because you get all the tools that you've got available in those pieces of software. So I would say that one's probably the next step up, because it's also, you don't need to send your guests thousands of dollars of equipment to join, but you still get pretty good quality tools on the host side.
I think
it is a two-way communication, so you don't have to set up a back channel.
It is. It is. And I think what some people miss, though, is that, they try to do that on their MacBook Air. Probably not advised. You really probably need to be A, wired, B, you need to be on a pretty powerful computer. Because that computer is going to be doing a lot of work. And you also need to have a quite a bit of bandwidth as well, because you're receiving a stream from the guest, you're sending a stream back to them, plus you're streaming out to whatever platform. So you need to have a good, low latency, probably wired fiber connection probably, or, a good quality internet connection.
Someone in my chat is recommending OBS Ninja as well. I guess that's, I know you guys, I haven't played with that one yet.
Yeah, again, I mean, when you go into that, I know Aaron's played with it a fair bit, but I follow the project and have very briefly touched on it. But it's a cool project, right? But like all things OBS, it's an open source project. It has its potential pitfalls in that regard, and that's one of the areas when you start to deal with a company, is that you have someone to call, right? It's like DIY solutions are awesome. They're very affordable. They're fun to build. But one of the downsides, of course, is who do you call? Right? You're down to calling Ghostbusters. You're not calling a company. Right?
You leave comments on everybody's YouTube channels is what you do.
Exactly. So, I would argue, if you are a company of a certain size, and I'm not going to create a barrier to that, but if you are a company at a professional level, it's worth paying professional money for a solution, just to make sure that it's going to work and that you have someone to call. We've already had lots of customers that are really excited about making their own kits out of Pearl Nano and a camera and a microphone that they're going to throw into a Pelican case and ship around to people pre-configured. So the person just can kind of plug it in and push start, and then they'll deal with the rest of it later. It just kind of depends on where you are. There's never a one size fits all, obviously. Everyone's going to have their own needs, their own workflows. But I kind of wanted to propose one last thing, is like, what if, Aaron was mentioning earlier, is a big fan of hybrid solutions. Well, what if hardware encoders were easier to feed into a cloud-based solution, because right now things like StreamYard, you can't use hardware to feed that. You have to use your computer in a browser. So what if a Pearl Nano was feeding something virtual in the cloud that was doing that, instead of, the way we're doing it and the way you guys did it was feeding nanos into a physical Pearl 2 and sending it back out.
It's like
what would happen
becomes
George,
an edge device, right?
George,
right.
are you proposing something here that we don't know about?
No. I'm just theorizing, spitballing, throwing it around.
I like the idea.
I'm in. Where do I sign up?
Well, but a serious question is that, kind of to Dan's question, is that the kind of direction that we would go at a professional level?
I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense for many reasons. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Joseph.
No, if you don't have to have the heavy hardware on your side, I think that's like the Pearl 2 that I was using for our call is a very expensive piece of hardware that everybody's calling into. And that's fine if you do this all the time. It makes sense for your budget. But if you're going to do these occasionally, then that's a lot of money to spend. And sure, you can rent the gear, but then you have to get the training on it and so on. But yeah, if there's a virtual system that's as easy as something like a StreamYard that everybody can call into from a variety of different hardware, they don't have to be using a Pearl to call in. They can be calling in from a Pearl or from OBS or from whatever system they have, or just from a web browser. Then that's awesome. Give the options and just aggregate all in one place in a virtual environment. That'd be cool.
That's I think the value of SRT is that you get that independence. You can get that from software. You can get that, and that's the thing I appreciate about Epiphan is you guys embraced SRT as opposed to creating your own protocol, your own proprietary thing. So hopefully, we see more manufacturers take that on as well, so that we could have those hardware encoders producing SRT streams, and then have a cloud-based service that could receive all that and aggregate. And that would, that cloud-based service, then you could do a lot of really cool switching type things too in the cloud, which becomes really super powerful as well.
And I think with the...
Oh, go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, I think the other part of this is when you are doing entirely remote contribution, then a cloud-based solution makes a ton more sense than a physical local device. Because like with the stream we did with Joseph's Pearl 2, we were using the Pearl 2 basically as a way to receive these remote feeds and not really leveraging the rest of the features on the Pearl 2, like the additional inputs and all the different hardware options it has on it. So we were really just using it for its own software. And that means it doesn't really need to be in a physical place anymore. So, when you've got physical devices with a bunch of hardware inputs, HDMI, SDI, and all that capability, that's great if you're going to take advantage of it. And when you're doing just these remote feed things, there's no reason for all those additional hardware ports. So yeah, just move it into the cloud.
I'm also just excited about the idea of like sort of decentralizing the crew. I mean, a show like this, okay, we can produce this with, just Cameron, maybe one person. But when you start getting into more levels of complexity, keying graphics, titles, media playback, the idea of being able to have those crew roles sitting in entirely different regions, or not necessarily needing to be on premise in a physical environment, it opens up a lot of opportunities to say, hey, maybe I'm the guy who produces graphics for live streams and I send my SRT with an alpha channel and, I can queue graphics for 10 different clients without necessarily needing to always be in the room. It opens up a lot of possibilities there as well that I think could be quite exciting.
Yeah.
Speaking of, there was a question from my channel. People were asking about how is this show being switched and what does that look like on that end?
Yeah, so I mean, our producer Cameron, who's not in the production feed, but he's in our back channel, talking in our ears occasionally. He's doing all the switching on the Pearl that's aggregating all 5 of our SRT streams together. So he's playing producer there. His home command center is not totally that different from yours, Aaron. There's a lot of screens and a lot of buttons and a lot of things going on. But the fun part about that is that of everyone in this call, and of, to be honest, just about most people I know, Cameron has some of the worst internet at home. But it doesn't stop him from doing this because he's actually producing it remotely. He's not actually funneling any of the data through his home where he is. We're sending it to a Pearl that's sitting in our office where we obviously have corporate level internet with lots of bandwidth. And he's just remotely controlling that Pearl, and he's bringing up that behind the scenes shot again. Normally, pre-pandemic, he'd be sitting at that console playing with all the buttons and the switches, right? The way we always were used to. But he can actually do it remotely. And in the case of a Pearl, he can actually do it through our system called Epiphan Cloud, which can allow you to remotely control aspects of a Pearl. Cameron's trying to bring up a screen share here, I think, to show his behind the scenes in his house.
Cameron, if you switch to my ISO, I've got a photo of your setup here.
Yeah, he loves to change it on the fly just to make it risky.
we have we have a competition in Epiphan that's like share your home setup photos, and Cameron won for 2020. But I think he's going to have to make some upgrades because there's some other people competing. But Cameron, if you yeah, we should do that. I think Aaron's probably got the jump on everyone right now. But I'll just show Cameron's setup. This is his desk right now. He's got his Pearl Mini on the left that he can do some switching. I'm not sure what he's using the Nano for right now, but a couple different monitors, clock. Actually, this up here is a little app. We're talking about back channel. This is called Unity Cloud, which is like a interruptible foldback that you can create a few different channels to do some back channel communication. So that's another solution people might want to check out, is Unity Cloud. But this is what a producer's desk looks like in 2021, and it's pretty cool.
Looks a little different from the CNN newsroom, that's for sure. It's not the same thing as old anymore, which is interesting.
I'll just show, if you want to see a janky setup, I'll show, this is kind of funny. I saw this as well. I mean, we could show setups all day, but
that's a different show, judging people's setups.
Why don't I pull this up? This is, we were talking earlier about like scraping from, Skype or whatever. Here's a 12, I don't know what that is. Is that a 12 or a 9 laptop setup for some Zoom? This is pretty clunky. If we can start to push some of these sources into the cloud and do the mix there, you might not need as many laptops on your desk. Anyway, I just thought that was funny.
Yeah.
And that's not uncommon.
So we might want to wrap up. We're reaching an hour now. It's been a really interesting conversation. I want to thank everyone for joining us. And of course, the question coming up of where can I learn more about how to create a live streaming setup, or simple setups, or more advanced setups. You've got a whole wealth of resources right here. So make sure to check out Photo Joseph. All these guys have great YouTube channels. Photo Joseph, Aaron Parecki, and of course Curtis Judd, and just a wealth of information on each of their channels. So we really do appreciate having all of you here today, and thanks for joining us. And we should do this again sometime. This was a lot of fun.
Let's do it.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Thanks so much.
It'd be great someday to have a panel in person.
One day.
Yeah, we're gonna maybe we'll meet up at NAB later this year. Who knows? So.
One day.
All right, thanks, and that's it for Live at Epiphan. We'll see you again in 2 weeks on Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern, as always. And until then, so long for now. Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks.